It's good to be with you tonight. I'm just going to share my screen. And we're going to explore together tonight what it might look like for the homes of our 5 to 11-year-olds, children like Jaden, to be places where faith grows and is shared and is explored. Let's begin by briefly just unpacking the language a little bit, because it's got a bit confused over the past year. Because for the past few months, we've been leading a lot online that's then taken place in a domestic setting. But on the whole, I want us to see that as church at home tonight. But what we want to talk about is faith at home, where we're talking about the activities and conversations and ideas which nurture faith and are centred in the home environment. Roman Catholic educators call the family the domestic church. It's the safe home where spirituality is formed, practiced, explored, and questioned in a way that can't happen in the wider faith community. And it's a place where the things of the wider faith community are honed and made our own, and we make it our own place and our own spirituality. I think it's important tonight to recognise that it isn't all children who find the home a safe place, and for some children that won't be the case. And not for all children is it that the faith is nurtured in the home. So we just need to hold that tension tonight as we talk. We're going to use this framework for our discussions tonight: listening, learning, and loving. Listening to one another, to God, and to our own experiences. Learning from the Bible, from others, and from our day-to-day lives. And loving. How does all we discover and learn spill out into the world and into our relationships? In his book, Think Orange, Reggie Joyner points out that every church has approximately 40 hours to influence each child in a year. And a parent or carer has approximately 3,000 hours to influence that child. So exploring faith at home with 5 to 11-year-olds fits firmly in that 3,000 hours. But so does a lot of other stuff, like school and sports and music and uniformed groups and play dates and homework and visiting families and lots more. And it's vital that we recognise this, but that we don't see it as a barrier. Instead, we see it as something that we weave faith through, so it becomes part and parcel of a child's life. When we're talking about a living faith at home, there are two key players, if you like, within that. The first is the child or the children. Now, I currently have one 5 to 11-year-old at home, and they are inquisitive and adventurous, questioning, loving. They've got a huge capacity for wonder. They're discovering. Their feelings are front and centre all the time. And they've got a very holistic way of seeing the world. And one of the defining characteristics of this age group is that they're developing this sense of conscience and right and wrong and justice. And that really frames a lot of what happens for children of this age. And into that, we weave the faith development and spirituality of a 5 to 11-year-old. And at this age, it's huge and it's very varied. So for tonight, I'd like us to simply focus on spirituality being how we are with God. And so a 5 to 11's spirituality and faith at this time is simply their way of being with God and God's way of being with them. Now, I say simply, but actually that makes it very complex because it's different for every child. But it does mean that often in the home environment, that way of being is known and can be best supported because it's the individual child or a couple of children in that environment. The second group then are the parents and significant adults who are in the home. Family life is complex, and the We Are Family research that was updated in 2016 identified 12 different types of family. And if you are a leader in a church context, you'll be working into a number of those different types of family. So that makes it a bit more complicated. And we also need to acknowledge that the wider church has done little up until a few years ago to equip parents and carers in exploring faith at home. And it's only really been recently that across the different denominations, we've started to support faith at home. Ivy Beckwith says that the significant adult's role is to pass on the things of God. And yet, for many of those adults, they find this difficult. For some, they find it terrifying. And for many, they don't know where to start. And Ivy Beckwith goes on to say this: perhaps the best tool we can give parents is to relieve them of the belief that this is rocket science. If we can enable the adults in the home to see that listening and learning with the child might simply mean saying, I don't know, what do you think? Shall we explore this together? Then we begin to create an environment at home where everyone can listen to God, can listen to each other, and can learn from their experiences. And the child's living faith can really start to shine through. Let's delve into listening and learning a bit more. It's important and vital to a child's faith to be listened to. Might not look exactly like this, but the child needs to be listened to, not patronised, not told to be quiet, not told to wait a moment. There needs to be a space for them to be listened to. There needs to be spaces created to encourage a child to listen and learn. It might be the physical space, the way a room is set out in a welcoming way. It might be the visual space, visual clues that now's a time for us to explore together. The emotional space, where the things of the day are laid to one side. Or an auditory space, where a child isn't rushed. Places in the home where a child's spirituality is respected. And listening together in the home will mean recognising that, for example, if we're exploring the Bible, we'll all hear and question in different ways, depending on our age, depending on our stage of life, and depending on our stage of faith. And in the home, we need to create an environment where everyone can join in at their own level. But the home is a great place for this. I don't know about you, but if I'm sharing a Bible story at home, it's not likely that at the end of telling the Bible story, I'm going to preach on it. Instead, what I'm going to do is encourage everyone to engage with it in a way that works for them. So they might be talking, they might be thinking, they might be playing, they might be creating, but they're doing what works for them. So that everyone, not just the 5 to 11-year-olds, creates a living faith within the home environment. Learning together might also be about practicing rhythms and establishing rhythms within the family for a child to pray or to explore the Bible or to worship together. And we'll look a little bit more at that later on. But also about creating prompts to notice God in the everyday. Encouraging children to find moments in their general everyday life to pause and listen to God and to others and to learn from those they meet. Not seeing the busyness of their lives as a barrier, but rather seeing it as an opportunity to develop a living faith. As adults, when we talk about our busy lives, very often you'll hear people say things like, well, you could connect with God when you're swimming, or when you're driving the car, or when you're doing the washing up. But what's the equivalent of the washing up and the swimming for a 5 to 11-year-old? What are those moments when actually we can be encouraging them to see as moments and opportunities to connect with God? It's also important to recognise that for a 5 to 11-year-old, a lot of their time, their home lifetime will be spent outdoors. Not for all children, but for many children, they'll spend a lot of time outdoors. And this brings a new freedom and an opportunity to listen to God and notice God in the natural world. The child can experience the awe and wonder of God's creation, then they're more likely to engage with God as creator and to engage with their spirituality within the natural world. In all of this, though, it's important to remember that this isn't about initiating the child's relationship with God. That starts with God. That's not about us. That starts with God. But actually, maybe pointing out to those parents and adults in the home who are worried about engaging with faith at home because they don't feel equipped, that actually God's got this, might actually take off some of the pressure that they're feeling. And loving. Home is often the place where we develop our shared values and our attitudes. This Lawrence Richards quote sums that up. Where there's a love that communicates belonging, a respect that invites participation, a sharing that facilitates modelling, common activities that demand Christian interpretation of life, and a trust that encourages responsible choice, there's a relational context in which faith can be born and grow and flower. The family provides a unique place to model God's love and justice and forgiveness. And the safety of the family allows children to experiment, to question, to push at the boundaries, to try their feelings in different ways as they follow Jesus and they explore their relationship with God. The family is the place where we encourage children to show generosity, thankfulness, care, forgiveness, and where we notice it and name it and nurture it within that context. But as well as their attitudes, the loving nature of the 5 to 11-year-old can also be seen in their actions. And for a 5 to 11-year-old, their actions start to make sense of their faith. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about the fact that one of the key defining factors of a 5 to 11-year-old is that sense of right and wrong and justice and growing sense of conscience that is coming through this period. So enabling them to express their faith in actions and service builds on their holistic view of life, and it prevents there being a disconnect between their belief and practice and action. So encouraging children to choose something that they feel their faith stimulates them to explore, that they can commit to as a family group or as a couple of people within the family. And then crucially, encouraging them to talk together about what they learn from this experience, what they notice of God as they serve together and as they learn together. So children listen to each other and to God. They learn from experiences and others. They grow in relationship with others and God. And this love spills out into the world in an active way. And so the children listen and learn from their experiences, and so the cycle continues. But we're going to explore that a little more in a little while. For now, I think we're going to go to breakout rooms in a minute. Fabulous, thank you. Just share my screen again. So as I'm talking, bear in mind that a lot of this is about modelling this in the work that we're doing so that parents see how we do this. So practically, how we're going to unpack some of what I said earlier. We talked earlier about the need to create space where the children can be listened to and where they can listen and where they can explore and reflect in order to learn. Very often a child wants to create a physical space in order to do that because sometimes that exploration is something they don't want others to see. So it might be a den or a hiding place or a little nook in the garden where they go and create a space. In her blog, Prayer Stair, Karen Turner talks about finding, she had one of those little half landings and there's a cupboard on it when they moved into a new house. And she gave her boys some paint and they painted the inside of the cupboard and filled it with prayer resources. And they began using this as a place for them to explore their faith. And when I say prayer resources, there were all kinds of randomness in there, but it meant something for them. And then they began to invite their parents to come with them into this space, and it became a family space where they met together. So sometimes it's simply providing the resource to create a space for them to explore in. It might be about creating visual space, a display of objects or things that allow the child to explore themselves. When my eldest was 6, his grandma, my mother-in-law, died. And when I told him, he went upstairs and gathered together a load of objects. So there was praying hands and a cross and Playmobil figures and a toy car and material. And he created this ark. And he sat in that ark while he processed what was going on for him. And he spent quite a long time there before he would then talk to me about what these objects were and why. And he invited me into that space in that way. But it was a space for him to reflect and be. But it might be something as simple as just an image that a child finds they can explore when they're looking at that particular image, a visual space for them. And what's key, as in both those examples, is that we're invited into the space. We don't just barge in. We wait as adults until we're invited into that space. It's also important to create auditory space. Rebecca and I talked about the 7-second rule, that when we've asked a question of a child, or when a child's finished speaking, we count for 7 seconds before we start to interrupt or prompt, because it might be they're just processing what they're going to say before they say it, and we need to allow that auditory space for that to happen. An auditory space is also about recognising the importance of silence to a 5 to 11-year-old. They are noisy and boisterous, but they also need some silence and some quiet and some prompts to listen or to reflect. The Roots at Home material often has prompts to listen or to pause or reflect. But I'm also fascinated by the kind of trends there are in children's small toys, things like poppets at the moment, and there were fidget spinners a while ago. But very often they are about a child sitting and being calm and being. Loom bands did the same thing a while ago as well. And actually that process of just being with the poppet and pressing it takes them into a place of silence and calm. And it might be that you add a repetitive prayer to that, so it becomes almost like prayer beads that you're using. But using some of these toys, these fidget toys that come out over time, to actually encourage the child to engage with their faith, using an everyday object when they're at home. And again, modelling it in our church environment so that when they get home, they try that out at home. So the importance of creating spaces. Listening to God can also be about pausing. And Pam alluded to this in her answer to the question, that life is busy. And it's very scheduled for a 5 to 11-year-old. There's a lot of stuff packed into their lives. But actually, this is a good thing because it means there are little places we can slot in a time to listen and learn from God. So it might be that on the way to school, a family are talking about their neighbourhood and maybe praying for people in that they meet, or blessing some of the shops they pass on their daily journey. It might be that at breakfast you have a simple morning prayer you share together, or that the day ends with the child reflecting on one thing they're thankful for, one thing that was hard that day, and something they might want to bring before God. Or at meal times, having on the table a jar where you write down or draw the ways you've been blessed that day, and you pop them into the jar on the table. Little simple things that are put into that schedule of the day that allow them to engage with their faith, to listen and learn from God in the busyness of their lives, building on the ordinary rhythms to create opportunities to listen and learn. And the God Venture blog, if any of you use that, has always got lots of little prompts on there for this kind of thing. We talked as well about the importance of the outdoors for this age group, and that outdoors they can create those special moments to stop and pause and notice the little things in nature. That it has to be child-led and be creative in that place. This is what Muddy Church is largely built on. Over the past couple of years, this has become quite a big thing for groups. But actually on the Muddy Church website, there are resources for families, things like the Jessie tree that they did last year, that build on that sense of small, little noticing moments in the natural world where we engage with God and we listen and learn. The Roots at Home material very often has this kind of thing in, and there's an example there. And then a few years ago, the community that I'm part of did 16 amazing moments in God's amazing world. And this was 12 moments, one for each month, plus 4 extras. And there were simple things like looking for a carpet of bluebells, jumping in puddles, running in the wind, watching a sunrise or a sunset, going and playing in the snow. That was one of the extras because we couldn't guarantee when it was going to snow. But it was a very simple thing. And they had one thing each month. And each month we asked them how they got on with that. But the simple thing had a profound effect on their listening and learning from God, because it allowed those small noticing moments in nature where they engaged with God in a very real way. For some families, it will be about sitting down together for some kind of time of exploration together. And the Families on a Faith Adventure at Home material is ideal for exploring together as a family where your faith is and what you've been exploring, maybe in your church life or together at home. And just some pointers for some of that family time. Finding the time that works for that family. Even if somebody tells you, do this every Saturday morning or do this every day of the week, it's about finding a rhythm that works for that particular family, because only if you do that will it be sustainable. Helping parents to see that if you do sit down together to explore your faith together, it's not going to be quiet and reverential. There's going to be people running off, the doorbell's going to be ringing, the kettle's going to be boiling, and that's all okay. Being noisy and unstructured is fine. And being flexible to respond to what's going on in everyday life, what's going on in the outside world, and adapting over time as the children grow and develop. And this fourth one is really crucial, making sure it's a shared time, not an adult-led time. Rebecca Nine talks about the need for a spiritual level playing field. And a lot of her research has shown that when there isn't that spiritual level playing field at home, then children don't feel they can engage with their faith at home, because they feel they're being adult-led, they're being talked down to rather than being engaging as a wider group. So it's really key that we try to make it a level playing field. That when we're sitting down as a family together to explore any kind of devotional type material or anything like that, that it's about your family. So you do the activities that your family likes to do. If your family doesn't like craft, don't do craft. And that's why there's such a range of resources in the URC material, so you can pick the stuff you want to do. You don't have to do all of it. It's about choosing what works for my family. so that actually we can engage in this exploration together. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. It's not a pass or fail. Try something else, work out what works for your family and go with that. We talked a bit about recapping the day a moment ago. And as Pam said earlier, using the seasons of the years as markers, as points in the year to go, oh, let's engage with faith in a different way at this point in time. So using some of those different ways as a family, if you're sitting down together. But remembering for the adults in the home and for us as leaders, if we're providing material to explore at home, it's crucial to recognise that this isn't a teaching model, but it's a mutual sharing as we listen and learn together. And we touched on this in the questions, but for many adults who are unsure about their own faith, or they feel ill-equipped to support their child in their faith, we need to provide things to support them. It might be a simple Advent candle liturgy as we go into Advent that they do together each week. It might be signposting them to something like Guardians of Ancora, where they can explore online together. It might be something like the Baking Through Lent that's been appearing on a lot of Facebook pages over the past couple of years, or something like the Lent Garden of Response that was in the Roots at Home material last year, providing different resources. And again, the Families on a Faith Adventure provides those resources and responds to the season. So at the moment, there's just been a lot of material responding to the fact that we're in Halloween. So responding to what's happening at that particular point in time and providing resources that an adult can pick up and go, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that bit. And actually, let's explore this our faith together in this way. But if you do nothing else, I would, as I alluded to earlier, introduce I wonder questions. Because asking wondering questions doesn't require you to be an expert, and it doesn't even require you to know the answers to the questions. These are the basic I wonder questions that are used in godly play. But once you get into the habit of using wondering questions, they start to come up all the time. You start to wonder about everything as you explore your faith together. So actually, for adults, if there's nothing else we do to unlock that ability to explore faith with their children by using wondering questions, would be a great way forward. And loving. We talked about the importance to these children of their strong sense of justice and right and wrong, and doing something to support and help others. That will come out in their attitudes and in their actions. So providing things that support that, whether it be a random act of Christmas kindness or Thanktober, like the God Venture have just been promoting, or whether it be in their actions by maybe collecting for a food bank. But actually, if we do something as simple as a shoebox appeal or collecting for a food bank and allow the children to talk about why we're doing that and what it is that stimulates us to do that and what will happen as a result of what we do, then actually their actions become part and parcel of their everyday faith, of their living faith, as they go on to follow these. We're currently in the middle of COP26, and in the community I'm part of, we've been exploring the COP26 challenges that Roots have put out. They put out 12, we just used 10 because that worked for us, and we are putting them on WhatsApp each night to get families to talk around the meal table about what they can do to make a difference in the climate crisis. So engaging children in action, providing them with a framework that is coming from their faith is vital. So that, as I said earlier, children listen to each other and to God. They learn from their experience and from others. They grow in relationship with others and with God. And this love spills out into the world in an active way as their living faith develops and grows. Okay.